Hello, I'm Natalie Graham and this is the Sunday Politics in the South East. Coming up later, as a new report predicts house prices will rise by over 60% in the next 10 years, we ask if this could be good news for the area's economy. Joining me in the studio today is the Conservative MP for Dartford, Gareth Johnson, Hello. And the prospective Labour parliamentary candidate for Hastings and Rye, Sarah Owen. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the recent announcement that Thames Gateway is going to get an extra £20 million, I think, from the government's Regional Growth Fund. Right. Gareth, I'm sure you're going to say this is fantastic news. It's a drop in the ocean, though, surely, when it comes to doing what you really need for the area.
It's been very well received in the area, and of course you can add this to the proposed expansion of Bluewater Shopping Centre, the new housing estate next door to Bluewater, and of course the new theme park as well. It's something like 35,000 new jobs in the area. So
it's a long way from being built, that theme park.
It's a long way from being built, but nevertheless it's good news for the local area.
Sarah Owen?
Well, it is a drop in the ocean.
Hard to criticise, isn't it?
Well, I'm sure the people of Dartford will be very pleased with this, but it is a drop in the ocean. And before we had regional development agencies which were spreading money fairly around the area, around the South East in particular, and places like Hastings and Rye benefited greatly from Cedars investment, and we saw investment in Priory Quarter, for example, which has brought 800 new jobs.
OK. We'll leave it there for now. Now, we could lose one MP from the South East if a proposal put forward by the Boundary Commission becomes a reality. The suggested changes, which are being consulted on at the moment, are likely to lead to the Conservatives gaining another seat. And in this region, there are only 3 MPs who aren't Tories. But many argue this boundary review is much fairer and that it's long overdue. Here's Helen Drew with, sadly, her final report for the Sunday Politics in the South East.
Potentially the biggest shake-up of the electoral system for years. It's a big deal for these people, as it would mean that the number of MPs in the UK will decrease from 650 to 600. But have people outside Westminster heard anything about the proposed boundary changes?
Boundary changes? In what? In relation to what? No, I haven't.
No, not at all.
No, I haven't. Nothing at all.
No. I don't even know what that is.
It's a reorganisation of the way parliamentary constituencies are carved up. It will make some constituencies bigger and all more evenly divided. In the South East, the number of MPs will decrease by just 1, the Faversham and Mid-Kent seat that's held by Olympics Minister Hugh Robertson, which will get divided up into surrounding areas.
We say one fewer MP means that that's one MP's salary, which is £65,000. Then you've got £200,000 in office expenses, so you know those cut down. Then there's the further costs in Parliament. We're not subsidising their rent, we're not subsidising their booze, we're not subsidising their dinner.
In recent years, the South East has had one of the biggest growths in population in the country, in part due to its proximity to London and the jobs market there. What that means is that some areas have far more voters than others, and the boundary changes are designed to even that out, so that each constituency has around 76,000 voters.
There are constant revisions of the boundaries, but this would be the first big change in years, and aims to address bias in the current system.
Well, the problem of electoral system bias is one whereby the system operates at the moment in such a way that if the 2 major parties nationally get exactly the same percentage of the vote, they won't actually end up with anything like the same representation in the House of Commons. One of the problems of electoral system bias is down to the fact that the constituencies are not always the same kind of size. And the Conservatives have systematically tended to do well in seats which are larger than Labour. So it means that on average it takes more votes to get a Conservative MP returned to Parliament than it takes to get a Labour MP returned to Parliament.
In the South East, there are only 3 non-Conservative MPs, and the plans could mean that these 2 are in trouble. In Brighton Pavilion, the country's only Green MP, Caroline Lucas, could lose her seat, as some Green strongholds within her constituency will be transferred to surrounding areas. These strongholds include the Green Council leader Jason Kitcat's ward. And Norman Baker, the Lib Dem MP and Transport Minister, could lose out, because his Lewis constituency will be redrawn to take in a largely right-wing rural area, meaning that it could become Conservative. Unsurprisingly, the plans are championed by the Conservatives, including the Brighton Kemp Town MP, who would inherit some of Norman Baker's constituency.
We're having to make very difficult decisions as a coalition government. We're making cuts in many areas, and that's very difficult to do. So I don't see how it's possible for MPs to turn around and say, actually, it's a great idea, but it doesn't apply to us. The cost of politics is escalating, and the whole idea of reducing the number of MPs and making it fair is surely has got to be a good thing that everyone can agree with.
Would you be saying that if you were possibly set to lose your seat?
I don't think it'd make any difference. I think I'd be concentrating on the job in hand.
But would it be a shame to lose a Green and a Lib Dem from such a Tory-dominated region?
I don't think we should be basing our electoral system on the MPs that, whether we want to keep an individual MP in their seat. We need a fairer system where votes count for equal measure when they are in Brighton or whether they're in Kent. The point here is that whether it's Norman Baker or it's Caroline Lucas, those individual MPs can go to their constituents, go to their future constituents and say, look, I have represented Parliament, I have been an advocate, this is why you should elect me.
There's currently a consultation on the changes, and there'll be a vote in Parliament next year. Whilst the population of the South East has changed rapidly, there haven't been substantial changes to the jigsaw of parliamentary constituencies for years, and many believe the current system is unfair and costly. So isn't this a reasonable attempt to address that missing piece of the puzzle?
That was Helen Drew reporting for us for the last time. Helen, we're going to miss you. Now, joining us from Brighton is the leader of Brighton and Hove City Council, the Green Party's Jason Kitcat. Now, as we heard, Jason, your own ward could move into another constituency. Would it really be the end of the world?
Well, I think it makes a mockery of the system, which is supposed to be about representing communities, when what is Brighton Centre, including the conference centre called the Brighton Centre, would be moved into Hove constituency. My ward clearly is not in Hove. It is a key part of Brighton.
But we left that boundary behind a long time ago when you became a city and a unitary authority. And if you forgive me, Jason, it's a cosmopolitan, diverse, transient city. Do you really think people who live in the Regency ward will care?
It is a cosmopolitan and diverse city, but people do very much care about the parts of the city and their different identities. And I don't think anyone would dispute with the general idea of having fair representation, but electoral reform is the key way to do that, and not breaking up communities. And it's even in the government's own proposals. Rule 5 of their proposals clearly says that communities should be kept together, and these proposals don't do that. It's a very silly attempt at gerrymandering,
really. There was, as I'm sure you're aware, a referendum recently on electoral reform. It's sad that the Greens may lose out to Labour in Brighton as a result of these changes, but as we just heard, it's in the interest of the greater good for a fairer electoral system.
Well, I don't think this is about Greens losing out to Labour. I think the Green position for Caroline Lucas would remain strong. I think what I'm concerned about as leader of the council and as a ward councillor is about the communities being represented. And yes, we are one city, but there are diverse communities which each want their appropriate representation. And I think the same would apply for Lewis and other parts of the region.
What's your complaint here in terms of the Boundary Commission? I mean, do you think they're going about this the wrong way, or do you think they're biased in this?
No, the Boundary Commission are clearly independent, but they've got a very tough job to do. What my concern is, I'm not happy with the government's attack on this, but with regards to the Boundary Commission, I'm simply saying that Regency Ward is part of Brighton and shouldn't be moved to be part of Hove constituency.
But the government has just asked the Boundary Commission to come up with the fairest possible system under our admittedly imperfect electoral system to make sure that people are represented as fairly as possible. That's all they've asked them to do. They've come up with what you could argue is writing a long historic bias against the Conservatives.
Well, what's fair in the eyes of a Conservative MP might not be fair in the eyes of another. I do think that it's right that constituencies reflect a genuine community on the ground. Otherwise, it's very difficult for MPs to do their job properly, and I do think this is an important factor.
As we heard in Helen's report, the people who care most about this, surprisingly, seem to be the ones who have most to lose personally. Can we read into this that you have any parliamentary ambitions yourself in Brighton and Hove?
I'm very focused on the job of being a council leader, and that's not a factor. My concern is having represented Regency Ward for 5 years. It's clearly a core part of Brighton, and I think that's how it should remain. OK,
Jason Kitcat, thank you very much indeed. Sarah, your party could benefit, as we just heard, in Brighton from these changes. Are you complaining about them?
I actually think that what we've just seen and what you've heard on the video is that it's only politicians that actually care about the boundary changes. No one else has. In my 11 years of door knocking, nobody's ever said to me, do you know what's the problem? It's the boundaries that's the problem. I'm not going to vote because the boundary changes. No, I think this is a bit of a red herring, really. The government, and the Tories in particular, have said they're going to spend £12 million pushing this through, and the Lib Dem coalition have said, we're not going to do this. Why waste £12 million right now when we're losing 15,000 police off our street, when I'm seeing hospital wards shut in Hastings, for example?
Gareth Johnson, that's a valid point. The Lib Dems are, if Lib Dems don't support this, which Nick Clegg has said they won't, you're not going to get this through anyway.
Well, we wait to see what's going to happen over the next year as to exactly what will happen come the vote on this. But it seems sensible to me that we have the same number of people represented by one MP. That seems to be absolutely logical to have equal-sized constituencies around the country. It also seems to me right that we reduce the number of MPs from 650 to 600. We have the highest number of members of Parliament than any other European country. We have more than each of the both of the Congress houses in the United States of America as well, more than even that. It's time that we actually reduce the number of MPs we had down from 650 down to 600.
You can understand why people are suspicious when your party stands to gain the most and you're in power, you're the one up making the changes.
Well, look at the current situation. If we were to beat the Labour Party at the next general election by 2 million votes, we would win by just one seat. Now, that is absolutely ridiculous. The whole system at the moment is skewed in favour of the Labour Party. All we're asking for here is a level playing field. That seems to be right and fair.
There's only one party that stands to gain from any of these proposed boundary changes, and that's the Conservatives. And I think that shows the genuine fear that you have about trying to win a majority next general election.
Even if these boundary changes go through, the system will still be skewed in favour of the Labour Party. We will still need a higher amount of percentage win in order to actually beat the Labour Party in terms of seats.
Look, no one ever says to me, I see too much of my MP. Actually, frankly, people say, I'm not seeing enough of them.
Can I just ask you about Hugh Robertson? As we heard, your fellow Kent MP, he's the only one who's going to lose his seat in our region as things stand altogether. How does he feel about that? Are you worried for him?
Well, look, what happens to Hugh after the next election is something, obviously, between Hugh and the local parties. They will decide who their candidates are going to be in which particular seats. Well, he'll have a fight. I'm sure that he'll be looking for something near to the Faversham, Mid-Kent sort of area. He's a very good MP. He's been a very good minister as well, so I'm sure he'll find somewhere.
OK, thank you very much. Now, let's move on, or possibly not, if you're one of those people trying to get on the housing ladder. Property prices in the South East are predicted to rise by 61%. That's well above the national average over the next decade. That's according to a new report by the National Housing Federation. It says that years of underinvestment in the housing sector will mean that a house which currently costs £285,000 will be worth over £458,000 by 2022. The report also claims that rents will go up by more than half. Well, Jo Eccles is a property expert and she joins us from our Westminster studio to discuss the implications of all this. Jo, first of all, there's quite a strong argument that this will actually be a great thing economically, tantamount to quantitative easing.
Yeah, I mean, when house prices rise, it's good for homeowners who are already on the ladder. You know, it promotes confidence, it promotes more spending, the high street benefits, businesses benefit, people move house, they extend, it creates tax revenue through stamp duty, money flowing to the community, and as long as this money is spent well, then it's definitely a good thing. I think what's important to point out, though, is house price rises have to be a stable rise. We can't have the booms that we've seen in, say, central London. What we need to focus on is creating a stable increase. And I think with first-time buyers struggling to get onto the ladder, you know, if we have a fully functioning market, then house builders will start to build, and they won't be building if there are no expectations of house price increases.
And the worry, sorry, Jo, the worry in this report seems to be that the incomes aren't going to rise anywhere near as much as prices and rental prices will.
Well, that's definitely a factor that needs to be addressed. I mean, it'd be interesting to know the statistics that have been quoted. Some of that will be inflation and others will be actual genuine house price rises. I was going to ask,
do you agree with the predictions from the National Housing Federation?
I mean, I do think that house prices will increase. I do think that obviously a factor, a portion of those predictions will be inflationary-led. And obviously how that pans out depends on the government and how they address that inflation. But I think, obviously there are negatives for house price rises, but it's a really good thing. And also just for the community, you've got people who own their homes, they have a stake in the community. It gives much more social stability. If people are expecting house prices to rise, there's an incentive for them to get onto the ladder. There's also an incentive for buy-to-let investors to start investing as well.
Still a good investment. Property is still where you should put your money if you've got any.
Well, I mean, there's a fairly compelling argument for that, particularly if you look at the alternatives of where you can put your money. But also just in terms of the economy, because if we don't have housing and if people aren't encouraged to get onto the housing ladder, and if buy-to-let investors aren't encouraged to come in and provide private rental housing, it puts much more pressure on government-provided housing. So encouraging, and people won't want to get onto the housing ladder if there's no promise or no expectation of them doing well out of it and prices actually going up.
OK, Jo, stay there for a moment. Sarah, Owen, I mean, it does sound dire if you're not on the property ladder now. The truth is you're not likely to in the next few years.
And in the next few years, the average age for the first-time buyer will go up from 37 to 44. And that's all. House prices and increases in rents, for example, have always been a problem in the South East. They're at the highest they've ever been. They've gone up quickest and fastest in the South East. They've gone up 2.2% in the last 4 months. People are being priced out of the market.
And it stops other things. It stops people moving. It stops people arguably starting a family.
It does. And we've seen a 60% cut in the investment in affordable housing.
Gareth Johnson, what can be done?
Well, part of the problem is that we've seen less houses, new houses being built at any time since the 1920s. In some ways, it's quite nice for us sitting here talking about the prospect of house prices going up. It's not really surprising. We've actually had some very good figures on the economy lately. Unemployment is down, the inflation is steady, interest rates are steady. We've also seen us now coming out of recession. It's hardly surprising now people are actually talking about house prices going up and, of course, the concerns that people have with that when that happens, if it's not steady.
The other truth in this region, as I'm sure you're aware, is people think of it as a prosperous region with high house prices. There are actually a lot of pockets of low house prices and deprivation. Your constituency is one of them. Your prospective constituency, Sarah, is one of them.
Yeah, people are struggling to pay rent. We've got a local authority mortgage scheme which aims to get people onto the property ladder. But what we need to be seeing is more houses being built, particularly in the South East. And that would also help with the 2.5 shrink in construction industry that we're seeing at the moment. So although the figures that came out for the GDP were good, construction was particularly poor.
There is an argument that however many homes you build, you're never going to build enough to keep rents down, to keep prices down.
Well, I mean, what we need to do is ensure that the market actually leads the way on this. The government has a role to ensure that there's sufficient number of houses that are being built to make sure that the prices do not go into a type of balloon situation, which we've seen in the past, which are then burst. I think the problem that we're dealing with here is that there are just so few houses built over the last 15 years that we're now playing catch-up. That's what's put up rent in many areas. That's what's caused a problem with people not being able to buy houses because they're just simply too expensive. That's something that this government needs to address, and it is doing so.
There's a great scheme going on in Hastings, the local authority mortgage scheme, where they're actually helping first-time buyers to buy. What do you think of that?
Well, that's right. There's lots of schemes that are going around nationally as well. We've got the new buy scheme as well. We've got schemes in place to incentivise local authorities as well to actually allow houses to be built, and local authorities can take some of the share of that profit. There's lots of schemes in place. What we also have to do is make sure that the lenders are prepared to actually lend money to first-time buyers to make sure they can get on the property ladder too.
And that's a reality, isn't it, Sarah? It's not. It's the banking.
It
crisis as well.
It is the banking crisis as well, but I do actually think that we've got to get serious about house building. At conference, we announced plans where we would use the windfall from the 4G network sale to build 100,000 new homes and use a banker's bonus tax to top that up for 25,000 extra new homes. Now, that's a serious plan, and I think the existing ones that we're being seen now, they're just not cutting the mustard.
OK, just a moment. Can we bring Jo back in from Westminster? What do you think of these discussions here about building more homes, Jo? Is that necessarily going to bring prices down?
I don't think. I think we need to build a lot of homes to actually cause prices to fall. But we need to encourage that home building to happen. And without any price rise expectations, builders and house builders just won't have the motivation to do it. They'll be sitting on their land banks, and so you know, it's definitely, we have a severe shortage, which we're all in agreement with. But, you know, we need other things to encourage people to, you know, for prices to go up. And so, you know, we need people to come onto the ladder. And the schemes that you're talking about, they are very good. Some of them are better than others. Some of them, I know the Hastings scheme, some of them, they just don't help that many people. So it's not, whilst they're great, they're not going to help enough people. But I think as the government takes a central view on this and starts really addressing the key problems, which includes lending and house building, then we can resolve this problem. But at the moment, it's just so fragmented and nothing serious is actually being done.
OK, Joe, just thanks very much. Just finally, Gareth, yes, not enough's being done. Well,
we are working at the moment with lenders to ensure that particularly those first-time buyers that don't have a sufficient amount of deposit, for example, to put down for a new home, that they are being assisted, and we're putting into place schemes that enable those people to get onto the property ladder. Once we actually get that happening, then there's a whole shift around in the housing market, and people then are able to actually move up in the houses that they're looking for. I agree with what's been said, that actually getting the housing market right is so key and fundamental to a strong economy. OK, we'll have to leave it there. Now it's time for our regular roundup of the political week in the South East in 60 seconds. Here's our political editor, Louise Stewart.
The candidates for the role of police and crime commissioners have been confirmed for Kent, Sussex and Surrey. The PCCs elected on November the 15th will be expected to hold their force to account and have the power to hire and fire the Chief Constable. The Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt told a conference in Eastbourne that dementia patients face scandalous care and unfair discrimination. It comes as Kent County Council is calling on the government to urgently implement reforms for elderly people who rely on care services. More than a century after the suffragettes marched on Westminster, hundreds of women took part in a rally, including the Sussex MP for Hastings, Amber Rudd, and Brighton Pavilion's Caroline Lucas. They were calling for equal rights for women. And South East MPs vied with those from other regions to scoop the Westminster Dog of the Year award. The Bexhill MP, Greg Barker's sausage dog Otto, missed out. But the MP for Dover and Deal, Charlie Elphick's pooch, Star, proved she had the winning formula.
Over the moon. And today she really lived up to her name, and I was just absolutely shocked.
We're very disappointed that Otto didn't win, but I think the big shock there is that Charlie Elphick is not a Labrador man. I was convinced he would be. You've got a dog, haven't you, Gareth Johnson?
I have.
Did you enter the competition?
I didn't know. I've got a golden retriever called Fred, and I have to say he's probably the worst behaved dog in the world. He would have been barred from Westminster in about 5 minutes.
Can you take him next year, just so we can put you in the 60 seconds?
I don't know if they've got enough insurance there for me to take my dog there.
So if you get elected, will you get a dog?
I'd love a dog. I'd absolutely love a dog, but I don't know quite how that would fit in. But I want a big, proper dog, not... No offence to Greg and to Charlie, but I want a big dog.
It's interesting how many MPs took part in that, though. It goes to show you have a competition at Westminster, everyone goes for it.
Oh, they do, that's right. And that's just one of the competitions that you know about. There's plenty of others as well.
OK. Well, that's it for this week's Sunday Politics in the South East. My thanks to both Gareth Johnson and to Sarah Owen. It's going to be me back again next week, but for now, it's time to hand you back to Andrew. Bye-bye.